welcome to another VO radio show. My name's Andrew Peters.
And I'm Robbo.
G'day, Robbo.
How you going? He says with a mouthful of coffee.
I wish I had one in my hand right now, but I haven't.
Yeah.
Which is unfortunate. No, this week I wanted to talk about a lot of the newer people in the industry, the younger people who are coming into the industry, and how things have changed, particularly if, say, for instance, you're a creative.
Yep.
And I know you read an article on LinkedIn, and it was an older creative guy who had been made redundant three times, and all
I think
that
he
kind of
was a
stuff
little
on it.
jaded. He was making a few points, and I could see where he's going, but he got a bit pointed and a bit personal, and very general, which I think is very unfair.
Yeah, what he was trying to get at was saying that a lot of the young creatives are not as creative as the older guys because they haven't got that experience. Is that kind of
I
where
mean,
he was
that's
going?
sort of where he was going. He was sort of saying, that as an industry, as in any industry, really, we're sort of hiring younger and younger and giving responsibility to people younger and younger because we don't have to pay as much. There's not that expectation that someone who's 7 or 8 years in the industry is going to be earning the same amount of money as someone who's been in the industry 25, 26 years. And he made the point that, without the experience, these people weren't as creative. Now, I don't subscribe to that. There are some very creative people that I work with who have only been in the industry a short amount of time. I think the point that I took from his interview, though, or in reading between the lines, was it's interesting to look at it from the perspective of, do they have the confidence that someone's been in the industry for 25, 26 years will have? Because they have a wealth of knowledge and a treasure chest full of experience. And you can see this when you work with people who have been in the industry for a while. They walk in the room, they know what they want to listen to, they know what they want to hear, they know what they want to talk about. Whereas people who are maybe 5, 6, 7 years in the industry or even less than that, they're more asking questions. They're more saying, should we do this? Should I do that? What about this? What about that? It doesn't mean that they're any less creative. Please don't get me wrong. That's not what I'm trying to say. But they're not as confident about what they're doing as someone who's been doing it for a long time is. And that's only natural.
Yeah, well, it's the same with us. I mean, we were exactly the same when we kicked off in our respective industries. And, even after 20 years in radio and then getting into voiceover, I can still remember making some absolute fundamental clangers, which just showed that how inexperienced I was at being a voiceover talent. I should have known better working in radio for so long, but I didn't. But I also think there's a different thing that's happening now. And if you go back to the people of, your age, my age, anyone over kind of, 50 plus. So you've worked in probably, the 80s, 90s in advertising. So if we're going to talk about advertising creatives, in those days, those guys were earning a bucket load of money and the budgets were enormous. There was no pressure about, budgets at all. You want to fly a jumbo jet under the harbour bridge? Sure. Now it's different where a lot of these young people are coming in and they can be as creative as anybody else. But the problem is they're also trying to fit to a budget, and that's where it gets really difficult. And I think their game has changed. And so when you've got an older person saying, I'm more creative, maybe he feels he is. But I just think it's a different game now. And if that person was that young person who's working in today's industry, he would find it equally as difficult.
Yeah, I think there's challenges everywhere. I mean, thinking outside the box is still as important today as it was before. But as you quite rightly say, there are more constraints on how far outside the box you can really think. That's the thing. And I think that's the difficulty. And I guess to the point that I was trying to make was that whilst young creatives certainly need to be included in our industry and nurtured, are we doing the right thing in just driving older creatives and more experienced creatives out purely on price point, purely on the fact that, we as an agency want to save money, so we'll sort of raise our younger creatives up through the ranks more quickly and thus save money on an older executive.
Yeah.
I personally think that's the case because I know for me as an audio engineer, if it wasn't for being mentored by guys who'd been in the industry longer and had much more knowledge, I would certainly don't think I would be in the position I'm in now.
Yeah. We should look at the schools. You know, like in primary schools now in Australia, I'm not sure about anywhere else, but they have a buddy system.
Yeah.
So if you get your little preppies that come in and they get a buddy who's one of the kids who's like,
year 5,
grade
year 6.
4 or something,
Yeah,
grade 5, 6 or whatever it is. We should be doing exactly the same thing in a workplace where you have a buddy system where you have someone who's got 40 years experience under their belt and they've lived through the 80s, 90s, and into the 2000s.
Yeah.
And they've got all that wealth of knowledge that they can pass on. I mean, I know guys that do that. There's who's just retired now, a guy called Philip Webster.
Yeah.
Anyone in Melbourne would know him. In fact, probably in the advertising industry would know him all across Australia and elsewhere. He would always be the first guy to say, come in and let's talk. And he would talk you through stuff. Like I remember bumping into him at a cinema and we were talking. He said, you should come in because I think there's other things you can be doing with your voice that you're not doing. So come in, we'll sit down for an hour or two and we'll just record some stuff and work through some stuff. Now, who does that anymore? Who's going to give 2 hours of their time to bring in someone on the off chance that they can actually do something that they think they're not doing at the moment?
Absolutely. Well, for me,
would do it.
No. And for me, there was a guy you and I were just talking about the other day, Sprocket. He's probably 15 years in age my senior and obviously 15 more years experience than me. My second gig at a radio network here in Australia, he was my boss. And, things that he taught me I still use today and I still pass on. And when I talk to younger audio engineers coming through the rank, you pass it on to them and they go, oh, what a great idea.
Yeah.
It's this proliferation of ideas and ways of working and thought processes, everything involved that just gets lost if you purely on a monetary basis go, well, we're going to hire young because we can save some money on salary.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at life experience, it's like a big bag. And, you start off with a very small bag with a couple of bits and pieces in there. By the time you get to, our age, you've got a bag full of ideas that you picked up over the years. And they're accumulated from everybody who's given you input of different things. Like I've talked before about things that trick your brain when you're reading a script and you get stuck on a word, just crossing out a letter or something and writing it above it upside down. It just tricks your brain into and reboots everything so you start getting a fresh read. It's all those things I've picked up from other people that, I give to somebody else and they go, oh, wow, that's a great idea. And it works,
Yeah. Yeah, so, I mean, to get this back to a point that sort of probably ties in with the VO radio show, I guess the question I have for you is, as a voiceover artist, when you are in the studio and you do have some younger creatives, how do you feel about, let's use the word educating, and I don't mean it in a derogatory way, but passing on ideas, passing on thoughts that come from your experience to these younger people? How do you make a habit of that? Do you steer away from that because you don't want to offend them? How do you work in that case?
Well, it's difficult because you know the environment, so it's just I'm probably the last person they would ask. So you have your audio engineer producer who's probably the same kind of age as me anyway in a lot of cases. So they're normally directing, they're directing me, but they're also directing the client. But if that person's not there or there's someone with less experience there and you can feel that things are just not going the way they should be going, and you can also detect that that person on the other side of the glass has no idea how to get it back on track, that's kind of when you'll say something like, I've got an idea, why don't we try reading it this way? And then you can always test it out, you can suss it out by, the visual connection with that person.
I see it both ways. I sort of see it as part of my responsibility to pass on some of the skills that I've learnt and etiquette, let's be honest, and etiquette in a studio. Yeah. But you don't want to do that in a way that's in your face and, look, I know more than you and I'm better than you, because I certainly don't want to. Firstly, you know me pretty well. That's not the way I operate.
No.
And secondly, I would find that offensive if the situations were reversed. But I always come back to the classic story of a young creative who discovered, in inverted commas, Kev Goldsby.
Yes,
and
for
those who don't know this story, I'm sure lots of Australians will, but for our American friends, they may not. Kev Goldsby is a very famous Australian voiceover artist, older in years now, but back in the day was the voice of Movie Tone News. Before television, you would go to the movies, and before the movie started, you would see the Movie Tone News, which was really their version of nightly news. They'd talk about what had been going on. And Kev Goldsby was the voice of Movie Tone News in Australia. So everybody knew Kev's voice. About 10 years ago, a young creative wrote a script that required that sort of sound for whatever it was that he was selling. And he went through the casting CDs back then. It was before the days of the internet. And came across Kev's voice and went, oh, my God, I can't believe how close that sounds to the Movie Tone News guy. Let's get this guy in. And the story goes that during the session, Kev was there doing the Movie Tone News voice, as only he can. And this young creative was sitting at the back of the room going, oh, look, it's not quite right. Can we do this? Can we do that? Can we do this? And it was about 15, 16 takes in when the audio engineer turned off the talkback, turned around to this guy and went, look, you are aware that Kev is the man. He is Mr. Movie Tone News. And turned the talk back on, and this young creative went, well, actually, you know what? I think we've got enough there. We've probably got it in the can. Thanks very much.
Yes, exactly.
So, just that gentle cajoling. And I guess that comes back to our earlier point too, is if there was an older or a more senior creative involved in the mix, he would have told this poor young kid before he went to the session that, well, actually, mate, Kev is Mr. Movie Tone News. You know what I mean? It's even those little things that sort of make it work for everybody. But I've always enjoyed that story. And I sometimes wondered if it was an urban myth. And I recently worked with Kev and posed him the question, and it actually is a true story, apparently. So there you go.
Aha. Beautiful.
Yeah, indeed. So I mean, I guess the point I was trying to make was that as an engineer, when I'm working with these younger guys, I'd like to make it part of my mission to educate if I can without shoving it down their throat, I guess is sort of what I'm trying to say.
Well, there's an old saying, which I'm going to paraphrase, so I can't remember how the saying goes. You have to know your history before you can make decisions on the future.
Nice. I like that.
Yeah. And I think it's actually quite topical considering the political climate we're living in.
Yes. Don't get me started on that.
Yeah, well, let's not get started on that.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's probably a good one to leave us with or leave with on this show.
Indeed. And we've got a big one coming up soon. We've got Harlan Hogan coming back for another chat.
Give us a few tips on how to use the Porta Booth Pro, which I've, as mentioned before, I'm finding absolutely superb on the road.
Great. Look forward to it.
Excellent. Have a good one.
You too.
Coffee o'clock.
The VO Radio Show is produced in the studios of Voodoo Sound. To polish your next audio production, check us out at voodoo-sound.com. Find professional voices simply all in one place. Realtimecasting.com, including me.